picture a castle on a hill in the middle of nowhere. Now fill it with silence so complete it feels like a living thing pressing down on your chest. Add cold that seeps through walls 3 feet thick, the smell of tallow smoke and something underneath it you can't quite name. Corridors so dark that even with a candle you can only see 4 feet ahead, and a woman at the centre of it all who's either the most extraordinary person you've ever seen or the most dangerous. Possibly both. Almost certainly both. That's Čachtice, a fortress above a village in the Kingdom of Hungary in the year of our Lord 1609. A place where you could wake up in silk sheets and be dead by nightfall. Where the most powerful widow in Central Europe hosts musical evenings and writes letters to her sons about their education, and corresponds with kings, and where, in the rooms below, things are happening that nobody upstairs is supposed to know about. We're going back there tonight, not as historians looking at documents and court testimony, not as tourists reading the little placard outside the ruin. We're living it. One girl, one winter, one castle. Everything she would have seen, smelled, heard, and somehow survived. So I make these history stories, and honestly, I don't know if you're listening to fall asleep, or if you're one of those people who genuinely enjoys lying in the dark hearing about the most infamous woman in Hungarian history, and the castle that hid what she did for decades. Either way, no judgment. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Zuzia. You're 17 years old, and 3 days ago you made the worst decision of your life. Actually, it didn't feel like a decision at all. It felt like the only option. Your father's harvest failed 2 years running. Your mother has been coughing since September. Your younger brother and sister need feeding. And then a woman came to the village, a well-dressed woman, not noble exactly, but someone who worked for nobles. And she said the Countess was looking for girls. Young, healthy girls. Girls who could read a little, or at least count. Girls who could learn. The pay was real. The food was guaranteed. The position was at Čachtice. Every woman in your village knew the name Čachtice. Some of them went quiet when they heard it. You told yourself those were just old women being superstitious. You told yourself a lot of things. You're telling yourself fewer of them now. The cart brought you up the hill in fog so thick you couldn't see the village below by the time you were halfway up. The driver didn't speak. He'd barely looked at you when you climbed aboard, just flicked the reins and started moving. The other girl who'd come from a neighbouring village, Bála, 16, with red knuckles from washing work, sat beside you and tried to make conversation for the first hour. Then she stopped. There was nothing to say. The fog swallowed everything. You heard the castle before you saw it. Not sound exactly. The absence of sound. The birds that had been calling from the tree line simply stopped, all at once, like someone had lifted a curtain down on the world. Then the walls appeared, dark stone rising out of the mist, higher than you expected, much higher, and old. Not the kind of old that looks romantic in stories, but the kind that looks like it has simply outlasted everything that tried to challenge it. The kind of old that makes you feel small, not because the building is beautiful, but because it has simply been standing here, quietly, waiting, for longer than anyone alive can remember. You and Bála were shown to a small room off the main kitchen courtyard. Narrow beds, straw mattresses, 1 blanket each. A brazier in the corner that heated the room to something slightly warmer than the corridor outside, which was itself slightly warmer than the courtyard, which was itself just barely above the temperature that would kill you. It is November. You are in the Carpathian foothills. The cold here has a particular character. Not the damp cold you know from the lowlands, but a dry, penetrating cold that gets into your joints and stays there, that makes the stones of the walls feel like they're radiating chill outward rather than simply failing to radiate warmth. Borbala fell asleep quickly. She had the particular gift of exhaustion, the ability to pass out before the situation fully registered. You lay awake, listening. The castle breathes at night. That's the only word for it. Stone buildings this old have their own acoustics. Wind finds paths through the walls in ways the original builders never intended, moving through cracks and passages and rooms long since sealed, producing sounds that don't quite resolve into anything recognizable. A low moan that might be wind or might not. A faint, irregular tapping that comes from the direction of the lower courtyard and then stops. Something that, if you were being dramatic about it, might sound like someone calling out, but muffled, far away, possibly just the way sound bounces off hillside rock. Possibly. You were told the rules the next morning by a woman named Ilona Jo. Ilona Jo is one of the Countess's most trusted servants. She's maybe 50, or maybe 60, or maybe she was born looking like something between those ages and has simply stayed there. Her face is deeply lined, but her eyes are sharp and her hands are quick. She walks like someone who has spent decades learning to be perfectly silent, and she looks at you the way a craftsperson looks at raw materials, assessing, calculating. She does not smile. The rules, she tells you, are straightforward. You are here to serve. You will be assigned duties. You will do those duties without complaint, without curiosity, and without speaking unless spoken to by a superior. You will not enter certain areas of the castle without explicit instruction. You will not ask about things that don't concern your duties. You will not leave the castle grounds without permission. You will, above all things, not disturb the Countess. The Countess is a great lady, Ilona Jo says, and her voice makes this sound not like a compliment but like a warning. She's not unkind to those who serve her properly. She expects silence, precision, and absolute loyalty. Those who serve her properly are rewarded. Those who do not. She leaves the sentence unfinished. You wait. Nothing comes. Those who do not, you hear yourself ask and immediately regret it. Ilona Jo looks at you for a long moment, the kind of look that takes inventory. Are replaced, she says finally. Then she shows you the kitchens. The castle kitchens are enormous, far larger than anything you've seen in the village, naturally, but also larger than you expected, even for a noble household. 3 large hearths, multiple ovens, workbenches running the length of the room, scarred and darkened with years of use. Hanging above them dried herbs and smoked meats and copper pots, so old they've gone green at their rims. The smell down here is layered in a way that takes your brain a moment to process. Fire, obviously. Bread. Fat rendering. Garlic and pepper, and the particular warm smell of a space where food has been prepared for decades, centuries, where the smell has worked itself into the stone. And underneath that, something else, fainter, a sweet sour smell that isn't quite rot but isn't quite anything else either. You notice it only in certain moments, when the draught shifts, when you're standing near the passage that leads toward the lower courtyard rather than the main staircase. You notice it, and you don't say anything, because you've already asked one question this morning and the answer told you not to ask more. Your first assignment is simple. You are to help in the kitchen, under the direction of the cook, a vast and competent man named Georgi, who communicates primarily through gestures and occasional grunts of approval or disapproval. You're to peel vegetables, fetch water, carry wood for the fires, and stay out of everyone's way. This is not glamorous work. This is not even particularly interesting work. But it is warm, at least near the fires, and it gives you something to do with your hands while your mind tries to make sense of where you are. Borbéla is given different duties. She's sent upstairs, to the Countess's apartments, to help with the laundry and personal service. You don't see her at breakfast or at midday meal. You assume she's busy. You assume this. The water in the castle comes from a well in the main courtyard. Getting it means going outside, which in November means entering a cold that makes you catch your breath before you've even fully stepped through the door. The wind off the hillside hits you straight in the face. Your eyes water immediately. By the time you've cranked the bucket up, your fingers are already aching. Not the dull ache of overwork, but the sharp, specific pain of cold working into the joints, trying to get at the bones inside. You carry the bucket back, water sloshing against your legs, soaking the hem of your skirt, and by the time you're back at the kitchen hearth, you're shaking. György watches you set the bucket down without comment. He hands you a cloth. His expression says, "This is what the work is. Every day. Winter and summer. Stop looking surprised. You learn to wrap your hands before going to the well." An older kitchen servant, a woman named Kata who is missing the top joint of her left index finger and who never explains how, shows you how to wrap strips of linen around your palms and fingers before you go outside. It helps. Not enough, but something. Kata is the closest thing to kindness in the first weeks. She's been at Čachtice for more than 20 years, which seems impossible to you until you realise it isn't. People don't leave Čachtice easily, not the servants anyway. The Countess expects continuity. She values people who know her household, who understand her requirements, who have proven themselves. "You do your work," Kata tells you one morning, watching you peel turnips with the methodical efficiency you've developed, since there's nothing else to do down here except work efficiently. You don't poke your nose. You don't ask things. You keep your head down and you do good work and you'll be fine. And if I do poke my nose, you won't. This is delivered with such certainty that it shuts down the conversation completely. The thing about Kata you come to understand is that she isn't cruel. She isn't one of those servants who's become so loyal to her employer that she's lost her own perspective. She's something more complicated than that. She has simply been here so long that the castle has become her entire world, and within that world she's found a way to exist without looking too directly at certain things. She is, in other words, a survivor. And survivors have rules that they've kept for so long the rules have become invisible, just the texture of the air they breathe. You don't poke your nose. For 3 weeks you peel vegetables and carry water and tend fires and keep your head down. You see the Countess for the first time on the 4th day. You're crossing the main courtyard with a load of wood. The logs are heavy, rough bark digging into your forearms through your sleeves, splinters catching even through the fabric, when the doors from the main building open and she comes out. Later, you'll realise that you were supposed to stop. You were supposed to stop and press yourself against the wall and look at the ground until she passed. You learn this rule the next day from Kata, whose face, when she tells you, suggests that your not knowing was an oversight of your training rather than your own fault. But in that first moment, you didn't know, and so you simply stood there in the middle of the courtyard with your arms full of wood and stared. Elizabeth Báthory is 49 years old in the winter of 1609. She is a widow. Her husband, the Black Knight, Ferenc Nádasdy, died 3 years ago, and she has been managing the estate since, which means managing the Nádasdy lands, the Báthory family connections, the endless political negotiations of a noblewoman in the Habsburg Empire, and also raising children who are sent away for their education and who write her letters, she answers meticulously. None of this is what you notice standing in the courtyard with logs in your arms. What you notice is how she moves. She moves with a stillness at the centre of her motion, a quality of absolute self-possession that makes everything around her seem slightly chaotic by comparison, even when nothing is happening. She's taller than you expected. She wears black, still, though Nadasti has been dead 3 years. Widow's black, formal, expensive black. The kind that's been dyed so deeply it catches light differently than ordinary fabric, absorbing it rather than reflecting it. Her hair is dark and elaborately dressed. Her skin is very white. She doesn't look at you. She looks through you, or past you, or at a point somewhere to the left of where you're standing, and the implication of that look is that you are not a person she needs to adjust her gaze to accommodate. You are furniture. You are the courtyard wall. You are part of the texture of the place. You stare for perhaps 3 seconds before you remember yourself and step back against the wall, logs and all, and look at the ground. Her footsteps cross the courtyard, even and measured. She is walking to the chapel, which sits in the corner of the courtyard, and she disappears inside it without looking back. Kata finds you still standing at the wall when she comes looking for the wood. You saw her, she says. Yes. And? You don't know how to answer that. You shift the logs in your arms. The bark has raised red marks along your forearms. You can feel the heat of them. You start. Yes, Kata says. Before you finish, she takes 3 of the logs from you. She is. You're not entirely sure which word Kata is agreeing to, because you hadn't finished the sentence. Later, you realise she's probably heard 100 different adjectives from 100 different new servants, and she simply agreed to all of them because all of them are probably partially right. The first week you think, beautiful. The second week you think, powerful. The third week you start to think something else. Something you don't have a word for yet. Something that sits at the back of your mind at night when the castle makes its noises and Borbala sleeps undisturbed beside you. Borbala came back from her first week upstairs different. Not dramatically different. You might not have noticed if you hadn't been sleeping a foot away from her. But she has stopped chatting. She has stopped making the little observations about the other servants, the small pieces of gossip she used to trade with you over supper. She eats in a focused, rapid way now, head down, like someone who has learned that meal times are resources to be used efficiently rather than social occasions. Once, just once, you woke in the middle of the night to find her sitting upright in bed, listening. Her hands were clasped in her lap. Her eyes were open and fixed on the door. "Borbala," you whispered. She didn't respond for a moment. Then, "Did you hear it?" "Hear what?" A pause. "Nothing. Go back to sleep." In the morning she was the same as always. Quiet, efficient, eating her bread quickly. And when you tried to raise it, she shook her head once and went back to work. And you understood that whatever she'd heard, or thought she'd heard, or didn't want to acknowledge she'd heard, she had categorized it in the same box where Kata keeps her not looking. The thing about a castle this size, and Čachtice is not the largest castle in Hungary, but it is formidable, a proper fortress built to hold against assault, which means rooms within rooms within rooms, passages that connect buildings that were added in different centuries, cellars that go deeper than seems entirely necessary. The thing about a castle this size is that sound moves through it strangely. Water drips from one level to another through channels in the walls, and you hear it 3 floors up as a percussive tapping. Wind comes through gaps in the lower windows and rises through the interior structure as a kind of sustained tone, low and irregular, that you can feel in your sternum before you can properly hear it with your ears. And other sounds, more localized, more specific sounds, the kind that have a direction and a source, travel through the stone in ways that make it nearly impossible to pinpoint where they're coming from. You learn to sleep through it, almost. The castle has an order to it, a hierarchy as intricate and precise as anything you've seen, and learning it is part of the work of your first month. At the top, obviously, is the Countess, then her confidants, Ilona Jo, the woman who told you the rules, Anna Darvulia, who you catch only glimpses of, an older woman who serves as something between companion and advisor, and who the other servants avoid with a specific kind of wariness that's distinct from how they avoid Ilona. Then the castle steward, the priest, the guards, then the senior household servants, then the working servants, you. Below you, technically, are the poorest of the castle's attached population, the village serfs who come up on certain days for certain tasks, who never sleep within the walls, who do their work and leave before dark. You notice early that the serfs who come up, the ones who carry the heaviest loads, the ones who do the roughest outdoor work, leave quickly, not rudely, not with obvious fear. They simply, when their assigned hours are done, collect their tools and go down the hill with the particular efficiency of people who have a very clear idea of where they want to be, and it is not here. One afternoon in late November, you happen to be near the gate when a group of them are leaving. 3 men, 2 women, local people, recognizable by their dress. One of the women catches your eye as she passes. You're carrying a pot back from the washing area, and you've stepped aside to let them pass, and her look at you is brief, expressionless, the standard exchange of 2 strangers. But then, just before she turns away, her eyes flick up to the castle wall above you and back to you, and something crosses her face. Not a warning exactly, more like a recognition, the recognition of one person in a difficult situation by another. Then she's gone. You think about that look for the rest of the afternoon while you're scrubbing the pot. Your hands are chapped by December. The cold and the water and the lye soap combine into something that cracks the skin at the knuckles, and at night the cracks open further in the dry air near the brazier. You've started keeping a small piece of lard scrounged from the kitchen to rub into your hands before you sleep, and in the morning your fingers feel something approaching functional, something approaching, not quite achieving. The work itself is not difficult in any way that requires intelligence. It's difficult in the way that grinding physical labour is difficult. It exhausts you steadily without drama, a long low drain on your body's resources that by the end of each day leaves you with a weight in your muscles that isn't exactly pain, but isn't exactly not pain either. Your back aches from the water carrying. Your knees ache from kneeling on stone floors to tend the lower hearths. Your shoulders ache from the logs, but you eat twice a day. Real food, not abundant, not luxurious, but real. Bread, soup with actual meat in it. Root vegetables roasted in the hearth. More food than you are eating at home, though this feels disloyal to notice, and you notice it anyway because the body doesn't traffic in loyalty, only in hunger and its absence. At home, there were evenings when supper was bread soaked in the water the turnips had been boiled in. There were mornings when your brother complained he was hungry, and your mother said nothing because there was nothing to say. There were months when the gap between what you had and what you needed was wide enough to feel, in the body, as a chronic low-grade desperation that coloured everything. Here, that particular desperation is absent. Other things have taken its place, but that one is gone. This is, you understand dimly, part of how it works, how any of it works. You trade one set of dangers for another, and the trade feels worth it until you understand the full terms of what you've traded into. Borbala disappears in December, not in the dramatic way the word suggests. She doesn't vanish overnight. She simply, gradually, isn't where she usually is. First, she stops coming to the evening meal. She ate upstairs, you were told. Duties kept her. Then she stops appearing in your shared room until very late at night. So late that by the time she comes in you're already asleep, and by the time you're up she's already gone. Then one morning you wake and her blanket is thrown back and slightly disarranged, in the way a bed looks after someone has left it in a hurry, and she doesn't come to the morning meal. And Kata, when you ask, says she's been reassigned to different duties. What duties? Duties that don't concern you. She's my friend. Kata is quiet for a moment. She's folding a piece of cloth, folding it with the precise, practiced movements of someone who has folded cloth 10,000 times and knows the exact right way to make the crease fall. You'll make other friends, she says. The thing Carter doesn't say is that this is not unusual, that girls come and go, that the Countess's household is always in flux, that she employs many people across many properties, that it's natural for servants to be moved between positions, between properties, between tasks. Kata doesn't say this. Later you'll wonder whether the not saying was accidental or deliberate. What she does say is, get back to work. You get back to work. You tell yourself Borbala has been moved to a different property. The Countess has other castles, Sarva, Bratislava, others. It's reasonable. It's the reasonable explanation. You hold on to it the way you hold on to the lard cloth on the coldest mornings, knowing it's not quite enough, but using it anyway because the alternative is worse. The alternative is the thing you've been carefully not looking at for weeks now. Winter deepens, December becomes January. The temperature drops to something that stops being describable as cold and starts being describable as a physical assault. The well water in the courtyard has a skim of ice each morning that you have to break with the heel of your boot before you can lower the bucket. The sky above the castle walls is a particular shade of white-grey that is the colour of imminent snow, and then, when the snow comes, it is also the colour of existing snow, undifferentiated, a sky and a courtyard and a hillside that are all made of the same white-grey substance. The castle in snow becomes something else, something more enclosed. The sounds from outside diminish further. The wind has less to work with. In the silences between the night noises, the silence itself becomes denser, more present, more like a thing rather than an absence. You've been here 2 months. You know the shape of the kitchen. You know how to bank the fire so it will still be going when Georgi comes in at 5 in the morning. You know which floorboard in the passage outside your room creaks, and you've learned to step over it without thinking. You know which sounds are just the castle and which sounds are not. This distinction, which you couldn't have made in November, is now something you carry with you the way you carry the lard for your hands, automatically, without examining it too closely, just as a necessary accommodation to the reality of where you are. The sounds that are not just the castle happen at irregular intervals, mostly at night, occasionally in the late afternoon when the light is already going and the courtyard is empty. They come from somewhere below the main kitchen level, below the storage cellars, below the larder, from the part of the castle that slopes back into the hillside itself, where the original fortress is built directly into the rock. They are not loud. They are not even always clearly sounds as opposed to vibrations. Sometimes it's more accurate to say that the floor beneath you transmits something that your body registers as wrong before your brain has processed it as sound. A resonance, an offbeat frequency in the stone. Sometimes it resolves into something more specific. Once, very late at night, you lay awake and heard what was unmistakably a human voice from below, but far enough away and muffled enough by stone that you couldn't have told anyone what words, if any, it was making. Just the specific tonal quality of a human throat making sound. You put your hands over your ears, not roughly, just gently, just enough. In the morning you carry water, and the frost on the courtyard cracks under your boots, and the sky is the same white grey, and you go on. The Countess moves through the castle in a way that makes her presence felt before she arrives and after she leaves. This sounds like poetry, and it is not poetry. It is a literal quality of the household's reaction to her. Before she comes into a room, the servants in adjacent spaces tighten. Their movements become more precise, their expressions more controlled, the sounds they make diminish. After she's passed, there's a brief release, a collective inhale before normal activity resumes. You learn to read this system as a warning mechanism, which is what it is. You see her perhaps twice a week, usually at a distance. She passes through a space you're working in, or you're crossing the courtyard at the moment she appears, or you catch a glimpse through a doorway. The particular quality of her black dress, the way she moves, the stillness of the face above the dressed hair. Once in the chapel, you're close enough to hear her pray. You didn't intend to be there. You were sent to clean the chapel floor, a task usually done earlier in the day, but Yuri needed you for something else that morning, and so you went to the chapel in the late afternoon, when the light was already low and orange through the small windows, and she was kneeling at the altar with her back to you. You stopped in the doorway. You didn't announce yourself, partly because you didn't want to disturb her. The rule was very clear about that. Partly because something about her stillness in that moment made you reluctant to break it, the way you're reluctant to move when a bird is close and hasn't noticed you. A reluctance that has nothing to do with kindness to the bird and everything to do with what the moment requires. She was praying in Latin quietly, the familiar cadences of the rosary. Her voice was low and even. Her hands were clasped with the simple precision of long practice. She was utterly absorbed. You backed away as silently as you could. You came back for the floor later, after supper in the dark with a candle, and you cleaned it on your hands and knees in the cold of the unheated chapel, and you thought about the particular incongruity of what you'd seen. A noble woman praying, a woman known for her piety and her charitable works and her letter writing and her music and her learning, and the sounds from below the kitchen. You didn't know yet what you knew, not in any way you could have said aloud, but your body had been collecting evidence for 2 months and had started to draw conclusions, and the conclusions came to you in the chapel, scrubbing cold stone as a physical sensation rather than a thought, a pulling down in your stomach, a tightening across your shoulders, the particular animal awareness of a creature that has understood something about its situation. You were in danger. Not immediate danger, not in that moment, but the kind of danger that comes from being in a place where dangerous things happen, where you're small and unimportant and therefore interchangeable, where girls who stop being useful cease to appear at meals. The cold from the chapel floor worked through the cloth of your dress, through your stockings, through your skin, settling into your kneecaps. Your hands moved automatically, scrubbing, rinsing, wringing. The candle beside you threw a small circle of orange light that made the darkness around it seem thicker. There was a sound from below, brief, quickly gone. The stone absorbed it almost before it existed. You kept scrubbing. January passes into February in the way of all Hungarian winters, not improving exactly, but developing a kind of predictability that is almost a form of comfort. You know now what to expect. You know the castle in snow. You know the sound of the wind off the northern hillside and how it's different from the sound of the eastern wind, which is drier and colder but somehow more tolerable. You know how to dress to survive a morning in the courtyard. Your hands have gone from cracked and bleeding to merely rough and red. And this improvement feels like a significant personal achievement. You make a friend after a fashion. Her name is Erzi, different Erzi from the Countess, a coincidence that is apparently common enough that nobody considers it remarkable. She's been at Čachtice for 3 years, which makes her a relative veteran among the lower kitchen servants. She's from a village in the south, and has the particular quality of someone who has decided to be cheerful as an act of will, rather than because circumstances suggest it. She doesn't talk about the lower parts of the castle. She doesn't talk about Borbala when you raise the name once. But she does talk about other things, her family, her village, the particular properties of different root vegetables in winter soup, the correct way to sharpen a knife on wet stone, the social hierarchies of the kitchen, Georgi at the centre, all others orbiting in precise relation. And this talking, this ordinary talking about ordinary things, is more valuable than you would have thought 2 months ago. It's easy to forget, in a place where silence is a survival strategy, that your brain requires ordinary input, that without it, without the friction of normal conversation about normal things, the mind turns inward, and the inside of your mind, in this place, is not always a comfortable country. So you talk to Erzi about root vegetables, and you feel not safe but less alone, which is a different thing but better than nothing. One morning in February, Ilona Joe comes to find you in the kitchen. This has not happened before. When the senior servants have something to tell the lower ones, they send someone. They don't come themselves. But Ilona Joe comes herself, walks into the kitchen with her particular soundless walk and stands until you notice her. The Countess requires additional help with her baths, she says, without preamble. You'll begin tomorrow morning. You almost ask why you, instead of one of the more senior servants. You stop yourself. Yes, you say. You understand, Ilona Joe says, and it is not a question, what is expected of you in the Countess's apartments. Silence, precision, absolute loyalty. Something moves in her face, almost satisfaction, or the shape that satisfaction makes in a face that has forgotten the original feeling. Good, she says, then she's gone. Erzi, beside you at the workbench, says nothing for a moment. She picks up a parsnip and examines it, puts it down. Don't touch anything you're not told to touch, she says finally. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look at things you're not supposed to look at. And whatever you hear... She picks up the parsnip again. Don't hear it. What might I hear? She's quiet. What might I hear, Erzi? She starts peeling the parsnip. Long, efficient strokes, the pale flesh emerging from the rough skin. "Whatever you hear," she says again, "don't hear it." This is the closest anyone at Čachtice has come to warning you about anything in 2 months. You understand, because you understand Ursi now, that this is costing her something to say, that she's offering you the only thing she can offer within the limits of her own survival. You nod. You pick up your own parsnip. The surface is rough and slightly furred with the storage cellar's humidity, and it leaves a faint earthy smell on your palms, and somewhere under the castle something shifts or settles, or makes a sound that the stone muffles into nothing. "Thank you," you tell her. She doesn't answer. The Countess's apartments occupy the best part of the castle. This is true in every sense. The best light, the best heat, the best furnishings, the best view. The windows on the east side look out over the hillside and on clear days down toward the village and the valley beyond it. The windows on the west look toward the older part of the castle, the darker part, the part that slopes into the hillside. The furnishings are extraordinary by any standard you have. Tapestries on the walls, real tapestries, woven with coloured wool and silk thread into scenes you don't have the references to fully understand. Figures in exotic settings, battles, gardens, saints. Furniture of carved dark wood that feels, when you brush against it while carrying linens, impossibly smooth and dense. Carpets on the floors that absorb the sound of your footsteps completely, so that you move through these rooms in a muffled silence, even the small sounds of your own movement swallowed by the luxury. The beds are something you will think about for months afterward. Not because they're beautiful, though they are, high and heavily curtained, with what you can only describe as an embarrassment of bedding, layer upon layer, but because sleeping in them must feel nothing like sleeping in the attic room with Ursi now, where you can feel the straw beneath you and the cold finds its way in regardless of the blanket. You do not sleep in them, you make them. You carry heated water for washing. You bring linens from the cupboards, which are themselves organised with a precision that suggests the Countess either imposes this order, or her long-term servants have internalised it so completely it's become reflex. The bathing room is, you don't have a word for it. A large chamber adjoining the Countess's bedchamber, with a large wooden tub that takes 4 people to fill, and that has been modified from its original shape with additional panels that raise its sides higher than standard. The walls around it are hung with cloth to hold the warmth. The floor is covered in linen that you lay down fresh each time and remove and wash after. The water has to be heated in the kitchen and carried up in covered pots. Still hot, steaming in the cold corridor air, heavy enough that your arms begin shaking if you have to hold the pot for more than a minute. You carry it in relays with another servant, a woman named Dorothea, who is one of Ilona Jo's inner circle, and who communicates with you only through gesture and expression, up the stairs, down the corridor, into the bathing room, into the tub, back for more. The smell in the bathing room is overwhelming in the way of heavily perfumed spaces, lavender and rose oil and some herbal preparation that hangs in the steam, thick enough that your eyes water slightly when you first enter. It's not unpleasant exactly, it's simply too much of something. The excess of it pressing on your sinuses. You lay the heated cloths. You set out the small bottles of preparations. You don't know what most of them are. You keep your eyes on your tasks and your hands moving and your face neutral, and you do not look at anything you're not supposed to look at. The Countess bathes alone, or as alone as a noblewoman bathes, which means with Ilona Jo present and sometimes Darvulia, and you and Dorothea outside the inner door to respond to calls. You hear the water. You hear occasional low conversation. The Countess's voice, always low and measured, Ilona Joe's responses. You don't hear the words. You don't try to. The first time you serve in this capacity, nothing happens. The water is poured. The Countess bathes. The water is removed. The chamber is restored to its previous order. You carry soiled linens to the laundry, walk back through the cold courtyard, and go back to the kitchen where Erzi is still peeling parsnips, and life continues at its usual pace. On the third morning, you notice the quality of the water when you remove it. You don't have to. It's not required. The removal is simply a transfer. The water goes from the tub into large containers, and those containers are carried out, and none of this requires you to look at the water. But you do look in the split second between bending to grip the container and lifting, and the water has a colour that is not the colour water should have. Even water that has been used for bathing, you lift, you carry, you keep your face neutral. You think about Erzi's parsnip, the long efficient strokes. Don't hear it. Whatever it is that you see, don't see it. This is more difficult than it sounds. March, when it comes, brings a tentative warming. Not spring. Hungary doesn't get spring until April, and even then it's a fragile conditional spring, a spring that can change its mind and go back to February at any moment. But March brings at least the suggestion of spring. The light comes back slowly, a few minutes at a time, making the mornings in the courtyard less uniformly brutal. You've been at Čachtice for 4 months. You've learned more than you anticipated about how to survive in a large noble household, how to move without sound, how to be present without being noticed, how to do your work so efficiently that you become, as far as possible, invisible in the functioning of the space, necessary but unremarkable, which is the ideal condition for a lower servant. You have learned other things. There are girls, women, who come to the castle at irregular intervals. Not servants, not the established household. Girls brought up from the village or from further afield, younger than you in many cases, brought in under circumstances you learn only in fragments, from overheard fragments of conversation and the occasional lapse in Erzi's careful not-telling. Some of them are brought ostensibly for service, training, the story goes. The Countess maintains a kind of school for the daughters of minor noble or gentry families. She teaches them needlework, music, court manners. She is, by any external accounting, a woman of culture and education who believes in the improvement of young women. The young women who come for this instruction generally don't stay long. They pass through the castle's upper rooms for days or weeks, and then they're gone. Some of them go home to their families, presumably. Some of them are absorbed into the household as more permanent servants. And some of them, and this is what you've been carefully not looking at for 4 months, simply cease to be visible in any way that can be accounted for. You've been counting. You've been counting without deciding to count, the way your body counted calories in the hungry winters of your village without you consciously deciding to keep track. You simply noticed and kept noticing, and the number of the noticing grew. You think about the well in the courtyard, how the water comes up cold and slightly bitter, a taste that's just at the edge of perception, a mineral note that could be the rock it sits in or could be something else. You think about the lower passages, the sounds, the colour of the water in the Countess's bathing room. You think about Borbala, red knuckles, 16 years old, reassigned different duties, gone. You're standing in the courtyard with a bucket and the ice has not formed this morning for the first time this winter. The water just cold and dark in the pre-dawn light, and you're thinking about all of this in a way that is not quite thinking yet. More like feeling the edges of something, the way you'd feel the edges of a hole in the dark before you decided what to do about it. A guard passes through the courtyard. He doesn't look at you. You don't look at him. He goes through the gate toward the outer walls, boots on the now softened ground. You pick up your bucket. The thing that happens in late March does not happen to you directly. This is important to understand. If it had happened to you directly, you would not be here to tell the story in any form, because the pattern of what happens to the girls it happens to does not end with telling stories. What happens in late March is that a girl, maybe 15, dark-haired, from some village between here and Varg, is brought to the upper rooms for instruction. She arrives on a Tuesday. She's been here, by your count, 6 days, and you've seen her twice in the corridors. She has the look of someone who knows she's somewhere important, and is trying to behave accordingly, a slight self-consciousness about her posture, the way young people look when they're working very hard to make a good impression. On the 7th night you hear something. You've been sleeping poorly for weeks, the accumulated weight of 4 months of careful not noticing finally breaking through into your sleep in irregular ways, waking you at odd hours with a heart going fast and no specific reason. You wake at some point in the small hours, the grey period when it's not exactly dark but not approaching light either. And the castle is doing its castle things, the wind and the stone making their sounds, and underneath those sounds there is something else. It resolves, over perhaps 2 minutes, into something specific enough that you cannot apply the Erzi principle to it. It resolves into a human voice, a young voice, and the quality of the sound, the particular way it rises and then is abruptly cut off, is something your body understands before your brain has caught up, in the way that the body understands certain things that the brain would prefer to process more slowly. You are sitting up in the dark. Your hands are on your knees. Your heart is doing something it has never done before, a kind of hard, rapid insistence, pressing against the inside of your chest as if trying to communicate something urgent. The sound does not come again. Erzi's breathing beside you is slow and even. She didn't wake, or she's pretending not to have woken. The distinction in this place is meaningful. You sit in the dark for a long time, then you lie down, you pull the blanket up. The brazier has gone low and the room is cold, and outside the castle the last of March's snow is doing whatever it's doing in the dark, melting or settling or simply sitting in the cold air, and you close your eyes and you think about your mother and your brother and your sister, and the food you've been able to send home with the monthly courier, and the fact that your sister's cough has apparently improved based on the last letter your mother sent with the neighbour who was coming this direction and knew to stop at the castle for whatever messages were waiting. You think about all of this, and you breathe slowly and deliberately, and eventually, sleep comes back. In the morning, the dark-haired girl is not at breakfast. Erzi doesn't comment on this. You don't comment on this. Georgi moves through the kitchen on his morning rounds and makes his assessing sounds at the various preparations, and life continues. You carry water, you chop vegetables. Your hands move automatically and your face is neutral, and inside you there is something building. Something that has been building for months, and that has now, in the small hours of this March morning, crossed some threshold you can feel but cannot name. You're not going to pretend you didn't hear it. You're not going to pretend you haven't been counting. You're not going to be Carter. The question, The only question that matters now is what you can do about it while staying alive. The letter takes you 3 days to compose in your head, because you have to do the composing in your head rather than on paper, since paper in the kitchen is not something you can access, and the composing itself is the most difficult thinking you've done in years. More difficult than managing the cold or the work or the fear, because it requires you to hold two contradictory things simultaneously: the truth of what you know and the knowledge of what will happen to you if you're wrong, or if you're right and the wrong person finds out first. You know that Elizabeth Báthory is one of the most powerful people in this part of the empire. Her family connections, the Báthory name, the nasty fortune she manages, these give her influence that extends far beyond the walls of this castle. You know that servants who speak against their employers have historically very limited options and generally worse outcomes than the employers. You know that the local priest must have some awareness. You know that the village must have some awareness. The serfs who come up the hill and leave before dark must know something, which means this has been known to varying degrees by various people for some time, and has continued anyway, which tells you something about how protected she is and how unprotected you are. You are 17 years old. You are a village girl. You have no connections, no money, no leverage. You have your hands and your ability to peel vegetables and carry water, and your life, which is currently intact, which is more than Barbara has, possibly, which is more than the dark-haired girl has, possibly. The courage required is not the romantic kind. It's the smaller, colder kind. The kind that presents itself not as bravery, but as simple arithmetic. You stay and you participate in the not looking until it happens to you or someone else you care about. Or you try something, not a dramatic confrontation, not a public denunciation, something smaller, a letter to an official in the nearest town, an approach to the local priest, a word to someone with more authority than you have, which is essentially everyone, but some people with authority also have, theoretically, moral obligations. Theoretically. You think about the king's household. You know that the Countess corresponds with the Habsburg court, that she has connections to the Palatine of Hungary, that she is, in other words, embedded in a network of power that makes her essentially untouchable from below, but not from above. And the Palatine of Hungary, György Thurzó, you've heard his name mentioned. He's a Protestant. The Countess is a Protestant. They are connected by religion and politics. But he is also by reputation a man of law, the kind of man who, confronted with sufficient evidence, might feel obligated to act, might feel that even a woman of this power cannot be allowed to continue indefinitely. This is your arithmetic, thin as it is, cold as the courtyard well, but arithmetic nonetheless. The letter, when you finally have paper, 3 sheets, obtained through a complicated piece of manoeuvring involving the courier who comes monthly, who you approach with extreme caution and careful words about needing to write to your mother, is not long. You cannot write well enough to be long. You can write, you told the recruitment woman the truth, you can read a little, write a little. But composing an accusation against the most powerful woman in the region, in a language where you're working at the edge of your ability, is not something that allows for eloquence. You write what you know, what you've seen, the girls who come and don't leave, the sounds at night, the quality of the water, Borbala, the dark-haired girl, the dates as accurately as you can reconstruct them, the names of the women who serve in the inner circle. What little you've observed of the lower passages, you write it in small letters on both sides of all 3 pages, because you can't afford more paper and can't risk asking for it, and the writing takes 2 nights, working by candlelight in the attic room after Erzi is asleep, the candle hidden under the edge of the blanket so its light doesn't show under the door. Your hands shake, not from cold, or not only from cold. When the letter is finished, it needs to go somewhere. This is the part for which the arithmetic offers no clean answer. You can't send it through the normal courier. That courier is the castle's courier. His contents are subject to inspection. Anyone watching the flow of correspondence would notice a letter from a kitchen servant going to the Palatine's office. You need someone outside the castle's information system. You think about the woman from the village, the one who caught your eye at the gate in November, who looked at you and then at the castle wall and then at you again with the expression of recognition. She comes up on Thursdays. You've seen her at the gate several times since November, always part of a work group, always leaving before dark. The next Thursday comes. You're in the kitchen when the work group arrives, but you manage, with the specific kind of careful casualness that you've been practicing for 4 months, to be crossing the courtyard as they leave in the late afternoon. You are carrying something, a small crock of rendered fat to the cold store, and this gives you a reason to be there, a task, an explanation for your presence. The woman is there, part of the group heading toward the gate. You do something that requires you to draw on every piece of control you've developed in the last months. You don't stop, you don't make eye contact, you don't slow your pace. You cross the courtyard in a line that intersects naturally with the work group's path toward the gate. And in the moment when you pass closest to the woman, when your paths are perhaps 2 feet apart, you do nothing except let the folded letter slip from inside your sleeve, where it's been all afternoon, to the ground beside her feet. You keep walking, you don't look back. You hear the creak of the gate opening and then closing. In the cold store you set down the crock with hands that are still shaking, and you stand in the cold for a moment with your forehead against the stone wall, and you think about your mother and your sister and your brother, about the bread your wages have made possible, about the face of the dark-haired girl 6 days in the castle, 7 nights. Then you pick up the empty crock and go back to the kitchen. You're not going to think about it anymore. You've done what you can do. The letter is either going somewhere or it isn't. The woman either picked it up or she didn't. If she did, she either passes it along or she burns it or it disappears in some other way. Any of these outcomes is equally likely and equally beyond your control. Control in this place is a thing you allocate very carefully. You have none over the large things. You have some over the small ones. When you carry water, how efficiently you work, how invisible you can make yourself while still completing your tasks. You're 17 years old in a castle full of extraordinary danger, and you have done the only thing available to you, and now you must go back to the kitchen and peel whatever needs peeling, and carry whatever needs carrying, and maintain the face you've maintained for 4 months. You're good at this now. The face, the neutrality. It's become a kind of armour, a second skin, something you wear over the part of you that is still a girl from a village who is frightened. Spring comes. The genuine spring this time. April's tentative warmth becoming May's actual warmth. The hillside around the castle greening. The views from the courtyard changing as the bare trees fill in with leaves. The birds return. The courtyard smells differently. Not better exactly. The courtyard's baseline smell is what it is. Stone and horse and old wood and the effluent of human habitation, but differently, with the possibility of something other than cold layered in. You let yourself, cautiously, feel something that is adjacent to hope. 2 months pass with nothing. No response. No indication that your letter arrived anywhere or went anywhere, or was read by anyone with authority to act on it. The castle continues in its rhythms. More girls come, some stay, some go. You do your work. You help with the baths, carrying steaming water up the stairs, keeping your eyes on your task, your face neutral, your hands doing what hands do. Ilona Jo watches you sometimes, in the way she watches things that she's assessing for continued usefulness. You return the gaze when you must, with nothing in your face except attentiveness to your work, which is the expression she has designed your existence to have. Darvulia, the other one, Anna Darvulia, who's been the Countess's companion for years, is increasingly absent this summer. She's unwell, you hear. Her vision is failing. The Countess is, by observable report, distressed by this. The one relationship you have witnessed her show something genuine about, something beyond the cold self-possession that she wears as habitually as her black dresses. Even this detail you file away, though you can't entirely explain why. That she is capable of caring. That somewhere inside the extraordinary architecture of what she is and what she does, there is still the mechanism of human attachment, however distorted it has become. This is perhaps the most frightening thing about her. Not the absence of humanity, but its presence, diminished and warped, still operational. The summer moves. You move through it. Your routines have become so deeply embedded in your muscles that they barely require thought. The water, the fires, the vegetables, the stairs, the bathing chamber, the linens. Your body does the work while your mind watches, assesses, waits. You do not know, in the summer of 1609, that the waiting is almost over. You do not know that your letter, or something like it, has made its way to the Palatine's office through channels you'll never learn the details of. You don't know that Georgi Thurso has been receiving complaints for years, that the complaints have been arriving from sources more powerful than a kitchen servant, from the families of minor noblewomen, from a local clergyman, from somewhere in the court itself, and that the complaints have been accumulating like snow, slowly, waiting for the weight of them to become sufficient to move even a powerful man to act against a more powerful woman. You don't know any of this. What you know is your work and the sounds under the castle at night, and the face of Erci across the workbench in the morning, and the particular quality of the light on the hillside in August, when the sun comes over the ridge and everything is briefly, purely golden before the day's work begins. You know that you're still here, you've made it 9 months, you're alive. Autumn comes back, September and then October. The light turns and the temperature drops and the courtyard smells shift back toward cold. The leaves on the hillside turn yellow and red and then fall, and the bare branches against the grey sky look exactly as they did when you arrived. And the fact that you have made a complete circuit of the seasons, here, in this castle, in this particular kind of danger, feels like something. You don't have a word for what it feels like. You're too practical for philosophy, too exhausted for poetry. It feels like survival, which is everything. October becomes November, 1 year. And then, in December of 1609, 2 things happen. The first, Darvulia dies. Word moves through the castle the way all significant news moves, quietly and quickly, person to person, until by the evening meal everyone knows. The Countess is said to be in her apartments and will not receive anyone. The household adjusts itself automatically around this grief, softening its footsteps, quieting its voices, going about its work with extra care. You hear through Erci, who hears it from somewhere above her in the hierarchy, that the Countess is devastated, that Darvulia was irreplaceable, that the relationship between them was, and here the word Ersi chooses is careful and strange, a word that means close but carries something else, something that Ersi delivers with her eyes on her work and her voice very even, particular. The second thing happens 9 days later. You're in the kitchen when the sound of horses reaches the courtyard. Many horses, more than the usual traffic. Gyuri stops what he's doing and tilts his head, listening, and then goes to the door, and you follow him. And through the door you can see the courtyard filling with men, well-dressed men, armed men, official men, and at the centre of them, a figure you don't recognise but who carries himself with a particular posture of someone who is here by authority and who expects that authority to be recognised. Georga makes a sound, not one of his assessment sounds, a different sound. Go back to work, he says, to you, to the other kitchen servants, back to work. You go back to the kitchen. You pick up a knife. You pick up a turnip. Your hands are perfectly steady. The sounds from the courtyard are sounds of purpose, of official activity, of something being done by men with the power to do it. These sounds of an institution asserting itself against an individual, however powerful. The sounds of the machinery of law, slow and grinding and late, very late, but moving. You peel the turnip, long, efficient strokes, the pale flesh emerging. The Countess is arrested that night, formally, by order of György Thurzó, Palatine of Hungary, acting on the authority of the crown. Her servants, Ilona Jo, Dorothea, others, are taken immediately, destined for trial. The charge is murder, torture, the deaths of dozens of young women, possibly more. The Count contested the exact number, something that will be argued over for the next 4 centuries without final resolution. You will not be called to testify. You're too low, too peripheral, too much a kitchen servant with no direct knowledge that the court's officials, working through intermediaries, need from you specifically. You're also, you understand later, protected by this invisibility. The ones who participated actively, Ilona Jo, the others, their fates are severe. The ones who knew and said nothing have various fates, varying by how much they knew and in what capacity. You, who knew and wrote 1 letter, and peeled vegetables and carried water, are somewhere on the edge of all this, present without being part of it. You stay through the winter because there is nowhere immediately to go and the household continues to function under new management, essentially the estate passing to the Nadasti heirs. New people arrive to manage things. Some of the old servants stay, some go. The shape of the place changes, the particular tension that has inhabited it for however many years beginning to release, like a fist slowly opening. The sounds stop. The ones from below the castle, not gradually, all at once. One night they're there and then they're not, and you realise, lying in the dark in the room you share with Erzi, that this is a kind of evidence too, that the silence is as informative as the sounds were. You will leave in the spring. You have decided this. You have enough saved from a year of wages to make your way home with something to spare. Your mother's letters have gotten slightly better. The cough, the food, the situation marginally improved, your money having made some difference. Your sister is apparently taller. Your brother is apparently learning to read. Small things, real things. The Countess herself is not executed. This surprises you when you learn it. She's a noblewoman, and her class, even in guilt, retains certain protections that common murderers don't have. She is confined. walled into a room in this very castle, in fact, a room sealed with stone, with only small openings for air and food, and she lives there for the remaining years of her life, which are 3 years and some months, and she dies in her room in 1614 without ever being tried, in a court, her confession never publicly given, the full accounting of what happened never officially settled. This too is something about power, about how power operates even in defeat. She was too connected, too embedded in the system, for the system to treat her the way it would treat a common criminal. You think about this on the day you leave. You stand in the courtyard one last time, your bundle over your shoulder, the spring air soft and cool on your face. The castle looks different now. The same stones, the same walls, but the particular quality of menace it carried all winter has drained away, leaving something that looks merely old and cold and functional. A building, just a building. You think about Borbala. You think about the dark-haired girl. You think about the others whose faces you caught in corridors or the courtyard. The ones who didn't leave, the ones you counted. You think, there should be a number, a final accounting. But there isn't one and won't be one. The estimates range from dozens to hundreds, and nobody will ever know for certain. The record's incomplete, the witnesses dead or silenced or too frightened to fully remember, the evidence scattered across the decades of it happening. This too is something about power, the way it obscures even its own record. The gate is open. The guard, a new guard, not one of the old ones, nods at you as you pass through. You walk down the hill. The village is below you, the valley beyond it, the road south. Spring mud, bird song, the smell of turned earth, which is the smell of farming and ordinary life, the smell you grew up with, the smell of a world where the most urgent question every morning is what the weather will do and whether the harvest will come in. You've been away for a year and 5 months. You're 18 years old. Your hands are rough and red and capable of almost anything. You know how to bank a fire, how to carry weight, how to navigate a large institution's hierarchy while keeping yourself invisible within it. You know what it looks and sounds like when something terrible is happening nearby and you are not powerful enough to stop it. And you know what it costs in body and in sleep and in the small daily acts of holding yourself together to make the one decision within your reach and then live with whatever comes after. You know that you wrote a letter. You will never know if the letter arrived. You will never know if it contributed anything to what eventually happened. Thurzo had other information, other sources, other motivations, political and moral, that had nothing to do with one kitchen servant's 3 pages. Very likely your letter disappeared somewhere between the castle gate and wherever it was going, read by no one important or burned for warmth or lost in a pile of correspondence that the woman from the village passed to some intermediary, who passed it to another intermediary, and somewhere in that chain it simply ceased to exist. Very likely. But you wrote it. You named what you knew. You put words to the thing that everyone in the castle was working so hard not to see, and you handed those words to someone outside the walls and let them go. That is what you had. That is what you gave. The mud squelches under your boots on the path down. Your bundle is heavy on your shoulders. Everything you own, which is not much but more than you came with. In your pocket still, the remains of your wages, some part of which you will carry home to your mother and some part of which you'll need for the journey. The valley opens up as you descend, fields beginning to green, the smell of spring proper now, the mud and the growth, and the faint sweetness of warming air. A cart is coming up the road from the village, headed elsewhere, and the farmer on it nods at you as you pass and you nod back. And this small, ordinary human exchange feels so large that you have to stop for a moment after the cart has passed just to breathe it in. A person, just a person in the world, nodding at another person, continuing on. Everything can be that simple, and in one castle on one hill it was not simple for a long time, and somewhere between those two facts there is something true about how the world is organised, about how goodness and horror coexist in the same geography, in the same century, sometimes in the same building. You don't have a theory about this. You're 18 years old, and you are walking home and the sun is behind the clouds, but the air is warm and your hands will heal when you are not carrying cold water every morning, and somewhere down this road your mother is waiting. You walk. The village falls behind you. The castle on the hill diminishes in your peripheral vision as the road curves, and then a stand of trees takes it away entirely, and you are in the open countryside, just you and the road and the spring afternoon, and you don't look back. Centuries will pass. The castle on the hill will lose its roof and then its upper stories, and then most of what made it a castle at all, leaving stone walls on a green hillside that tourists photograph and scholars argue over, and local children dare each other to approach after dark. The road you're walking will become a paved road, and then a different kind of paved road, and the valley will change shape a dozen times, with the boundaries of countries moving over it the way weather moves, leaving it sometimes Hungarian, and sometimes Czech, and sometimes Slovak, and sometimes part of empires whose names were in the future when you were born. The name Elizabeth Báthory will survive all of this, will survive in fact in a form more distorted by time than most, growing into something between history and legend, accumulating details she may or may not have been responsible for, losing details that were real, and replacing them with details that are useful to the particular story each century needs to tell about what she was. The bloodbaths, whether they happened as reported, the exact numbers, whether they were 40 or 80 or 300 or more, the question of whether she was a monster in the way we need monsters to be monsters, which is to say simply and completely, or whether she was something more complicated and therefore harder to process. A woman of her time and class and the particular kind of impunity that her time and class provided, pushed into something that her time and class could not ultimately ignore. The scholars will argue, the legends will proliferate, the castle will stay on its hill, the girls who didn't come home will have no legends, no names remembered, no scholars arguing about the details of their particular experiences. This is how it works with the people who are taken from ordinary lives. They return to ordinariness in death, becoming the anonymous arithmetic of someone else's story rather than the subjects of their own. Their names were real. The names you knew were real. Borbala, the dark-haired girl, the others whose names you never learned, whose faces you caught once in a corridor and never saw again. They were 17, 16, 15, living their lives with the particular fullness that ordinary lives have, and then they weren't. And the distance between those two states is the most important thing in the story, and also the thing the story can never quite hold. But you're not thinking about the centuries. You're walking down a road in the spring of 1610 in the Kingdom of Hungary, and the mud is drying as the afternoon warms, and you can hear birds in the trees beside the road that you don't know the names of, foreign birds or birds you simply never learned. You never did learn all the birds. Somewhere ahead, your mother's house, your brother taller probably, your sister taller, the village the same as it was or changed in the small ways villages change, and you with more knowledge of the world than you had when you left, and a very specific idea of what you want the rest of your life to look like, which is not that. Ordinary, if you can manage ordinary. If you can find a person to marry who is ordinary, and a house that is cold in winter in the normal way, and work that is hard in the normal way, and food that is simple and present. Ordinary is the thing, it turns out, that you have been wanting all along. You didn't know that when you left. You thought ordinary was the problem, the thing to escape from, the village and the turnips and the small radius of your life. You thought the castle and the wages and the position represented something better. Ordinary is not nothing. Ordinary is not the absence of meaning. Ordinary is people nodding at each other on the road. Ordinary is your mother's voice and your sister's height and the smell of the village at the end of a long journey. The light is getting lower. The road is longer than you remembered. Your feet are tired in the way that travelling feet get tired, a different kind of tired than kitchen work, more honest somehow. The tiredness of going somewhere rather than staying somewhere. You keep walking. The first star appears, then another. The sky over Hungary deepens from pale blue to something richer, and the road is still visible under your feet, and it's going somewhere. You're going somewhere. That's enough for now. That's more than enough. But let me take you back, because I moved through those months too quickly, and the truth of what those months were like, the specific bodily day-by-day reality of what it means to live inside sustained and unnameable fear, deserves more than I gave it. Let me start again from December. From the cold. The cold in Hungary in December is a different animal than the cold in England or France or the warmer parts of Europe. It comes not just from the air but from the ground up, from the rock the castle was built on, which is itself deep in the earth where no warmth has penetrated since the world was made. You feel it through your boots from the first step out of bed, through the thin soles, through your stockings, the cold rising into your feet like water rising through cloth. Patient and thorough, finding every gap in your insulation and filling it. You learn to put your stockings on the night before and sleep in them. This helps marginally. Your feet are warmer in the morning than they were in November, which means they ache and throb rather than going briefly numb. And this distinction between pain and its absence stops feeling like an improvement around the 6th week and starts feeling like another kind of problem, the problem of always being aware of your own cold body. Your breath shows from the moment you wake, a small cloud above the blanket as you exhale, visible even in the dark of the room before your candle is lit. It rises and disperses and you exhale again, and there it is again, your own life made temporarily visible in the cold air, and then gone. The brazier in your room burns through the night on the nights when you're careful about it, on the nights when you bank the coals properly before sleep, which means when you have enough coal, which means when Georgi has allowed you to take enough from the kitchen supply, which means on the good nights. On the bad nights, the nights when the supply is short or when you misjudge how long it will last, you wake in the small hours to a room that has crossed from cold into something colder, into a temperature where your exhaled cloud takes longest to disperse, and where Erzi's breathing beside you has the particular shallow quality of a body conserving its heat. On those nights, you get up and rebuild the fire from scratch, which means fumbling with flint and steel in the dark, hands barely cooperative, the familiar small violence of making fire happen through obstinate cold materials. It takes longer in December than it did in October. The tinder doesn't catch as readily when the air is this dry and cold. You blow on the spark, coaxing it. Your hands shake. the cold floor under your bare feet. You've left your stockings on the bed, makes the urgency of the task purely physical, and you work the flint again and again, and finally a flame, the relief of it. Small orange flame in a cold room, the most basic human transaction, warmth for effort, and it still works, and that still matters. You hold your hands near the first heat and feel them come back to themselves. This is December. This is the texture of every morning. The kitchen, when you get there, is better. Georgi arrives first and builds the kitchen fires to a scale that would be alarming in any other context. And by the time the rest of the kitchen staff trickles in, the room is genuinely warm. Warm enough that entering from the cold corridor is a physical event. A wave of heat that makes your face flush, and your glasses fog if you wore any, which you don't. The warmth has a smell. Fire and fat and old bread, and the accumulated cooking of years, decades. The kitchen stone walls have absorbed so much cooking that you sometimes think you can smell it sweating back out in the morning heat. The history of 1,000 meals releasing slowly into the air. You eat your morning bread at the kitchen table. The kitchen servants eat here in shifts quickly, the eating being functional rather than social. The bread is dark and dense, the kind that fills you rather than delighting you, and there is occasionally a piece of hard cheese or a scrap of cured meat, and there is ale, the kind of thin ale that passes for a morning drink when you have no access to clean water, which you don't in the sense that all water here must be fetched and hauled, and the fetching is your responsibility and happens after breakfast, not before. The bread has grit in it sometimes. You notice this early and mention it to Erzi, who shrugs. Miller's not careful, she says, or he is careful, and this is as careful as he gets. She tears off a piece and chews it without apparent concern. After a few weeks you stop noticing. Your teeth learn to account for the occasional bit of stone in the grain. Your body is adapting, not in a way you can observe directly. It happens below the level of observation, in the slow recalibration of what requires effort and what doesn't, in the way certain tasks that left you aching in October are simply neutral by December, no longer registering as difficult because your muscles have caught up to the demand. Carrying water, chopping wood, lifting the heavy copper pots. Your back has sorted itself out, the ache that plagued your first month gone, replaced by the working tension of a back that has learned what it's asked to do and does it. Your hands are different, the softness of them gone completely, replaced by something more practical, thicker skin at the palms and fingers, the calluses, specifically located at the places where the bucket handle rides or the wood presses or the knife handle sits. You are a physical instrument of the castle's operation. This is what you've become in December, and you hold on to it carefully, this becoming, because it's the most reliable thing about your situation, the fact of your usefulness, which translates to the fact of your continued presence here, which translates to the fact of being alive. Kata watches you one December morning with an expression that might be approval. You're moving through the kitchen with a kind of efficiency that you couldn't have managed in October, anticipating what's needed, putting yourself in the right place before you're asked to. She says nothing, but the expression, the slight relaxation around her eyes, the small nod, is communication enough. You have become, in Kata's assessment, competent. In Čachtice, competence is its own form of protection. There is a room in the castle's lower level that everyone knows about, and that no one speaks of directly. You know it exists in the way you know all the things about the castle that you're not supposed to know. Not through being told, but through the accumulation of absence. the absence of information that should be there, the particular way conversations stop when they've been going somewhere they shouldn't go, the way certain doors are always closed, certain passages are always unlit, certain areas of the castle become, in the common understanding of everyone who works here, simply not places you go. The lower passages branch off the main storage level, which is itself a floor below the kitchen level. You go to the storage level regularly. The larder, the cold store, the room where preserved foods are kept through winter. In the dark and cold, these are all down here. The passage goes one direction and you go that way, and at the far end there's a turn, and past the turn there's another passage that goes further back into the hillside, and this passage is never lit. The unlit passage has a door, a heavy door, iron-bound, old. The kind of door that was built not for routine access but for containment. You have never gone past it. You have never tried the door. You've passed the end of the turn twice, both times in daylight hours, both times with a legitimate reason to be at that end of the storage level. A barrel of preserved plums needed for the kitchen, a crock of rendered fat that Cater sent you for. And both times you've approached the turn and paused briefly before completing your task and returning the way you came. The second time you paused, you noticed something. The smell. Not strong. Not the thing from horror stories. Not a wall of stench that announces what lies beyond. Subtler than that. A layering of scents. The normal deep earth smell of the castle's lower level. Old stone and cold air and the faint sweetness of the stored plums and the rendered fat. And underneath it, underneath all of that, a thread of something organic, something that you're aware of as a wrongness before you've identified it as a smell. The way your body processes certain information before your brain does. Metal, copper. And underneath the copper, something biological, warm-sweet even in the cold air, which shouldn't be warm-sweet, which has no reason to be warm-sweet in a room that is this cold. You fetch your crock, you go back to the kitchen. That night, you dream about the colour of the water in the Countess's bathing chamber. You wake before the dream resolves into anything specific and lie in the dark and breathe carefully until your heart slows. There is a woman who comes to the castle in December, whose name you never learn but whose face you'll remember for the rest of your life. She arrives with a group of others, young women, girls really, the mix of ages that these groups usually are, recruited from various villages with the promise of instruction or service or opportunity, the details varying depending on who's doing the recruiting and what story best works for the family being approached. She's maybe 16. She has dark eyes and a way of looking at things that suggests she's been told this is an opportunity and has decided to believe it. A deliberate and visible believing that is different from innocence. It's the belief of someone old enough to know that not everything people say is true, but young enough to still be able to choose to believe anyway. She sits across from you at the kitchen table for one meal, the meal on her first evening, when the new arrivals are always brought to the kitchen for supper before being shown to wherever they'll sleep. She eats her bread with concentration. She drinks her ale and makes a small face at the taste, which she doesn't try to hide, and this small honesty about the ale is the thing that sticks with you later. The thing that makes her face stay specific and real in your memory when other faces have blurred. She asks you something. You don't remember exactly what she asked. Something about the castle, about the routine, the kind of practical question a new arrival asks of someone who's been here longer. You tell her something practical in return. How to keep warm in the attic rooms, where the better water buckets are, the ones without the crack that lets it dribble down your leg. Small things. She thanks you. She has a proper expression for gratitude, a real one, not the performed courtesy of someone who's been taught manners, but the actual thing, quick and warm and gone. Then she's taken upstairs to the rooms where the girls for instruction are kept. 6 days later, she's not at meals. By the 7th day, the space where she was is simply space again, absorbed back into the ordinary rhythm of the household the way all spaces are absorbed once the thing that briefly occupied them is gone. You know her face. You have no name for it. This is true of too many faces. This is something you carry. January is the hardest month, harder than December, which at least has the novelty of cold, the adjustment period, the sense that things might improve. January has no such pretense. January is simply cold, established cold, cold that has settled in for the duration and has no particular urgency about it. It's not doing anything. It's just there, waiting you out. The castle in January develops a sound you haven't heard before. It happens in the early morning hours before the kitchen fires are built up, when the temperature drops to its lowest and the castle's stone contracts slightly in the cold. A creak, deep in the walls, structural, the sound of a mass of stone doing what cold masses of stone do. Low and irregular, not the wind, the building itself. You learn to identify this sound from the other sounds, the ones that have sources. Your categorization of sounds becomes, over January, a sophisticated and involuntary project. You can now distinguish. Wind from the north, dry, higher pitch through the northern windows, lasts longer. Wind from the east, colder, more intermittent, rattles the shutter on the east corridor differently. The structural settling sound, low, comes from within the walls rather than through the windows, doesn't repeat at regular intervals. The watermen going between levels on their night rounds, footsteps, specific cadence, iron keyring occasionally audible. The kitchen fires below, a faint warmth and pop that comes through the floor, only perceptible if you're awake and specifically listening. And then there are the other sounds, the ones you categorize separately, in the part of your mind you keep closed during the day and that opens against your will at night. These sounds have the following qualities. They come from below the storage level, consistent with the direction of the unlit passage. They are intermittent rather than regular. They are specifically human in character, by which you mean your body identifies them as human before your brain does, the same way your body would identify the sound of another person's breathing in a dark room before you'd consciously confirmed it. They are, in quality and type, sounds that correspond to distress. You've been keeping this categorization secret from yourself for 3 months. In January, you stop being able to keep it secret. The sounds have become, in their irregular frequency and their specific human quality, something that you cannot continue to classify as possibly the wind or possibly the structure. They are what they are. You lie awake on a January night, the coldest one yet, and you hear one of these sounds and you think, I know what this is. And then you think, I have known what this is for months. And then you think, what am I going to do? The answer that forms, slowly, without your entirely choosing it, is something. You're going to do something. Not because you're brave, not in the particular way the word brave gets used in stories, where it seems to imply a certain quality of fearlessness. You are afraid. You've been afraid since November, and you will continue to be afraid for as long as you're inside these walls and possibly after. But afraid and helpless are not the same thing. Afraid and silent are not the same thing. You don't fully know yet what shape the something will take. That comes later. For now, You lie awake until the sound doesn't come again, and the cold structural creak of the building moves through the walls, and the night gets to its deepest and darkest point, and then, slowly, begins to turn. There is a conversation you have with Carter in late January that you'll think about for years. It happens in the cold store of all places. You've both come down for ingredients at the same time, and the cold store is small enough that you're working in proximity, and something about the cold and the dark and the being away from the kitchen makes the ordinary rules of silence feel slightly suspended. Carter has been at Čachtice for 22 years. 22 years is longer than you've been alive. It's longer, you think as you count it, than almost everything. Longer than most marriages. Longer than most wars. Longer than most of anything that people undertake voluntarily. How did you come here, you ask? It's a neutral question. Everyone at Čachtice came from somewhere. She tells you, without particular emphasis. From a village 3 days' ride from here. She was 14. Her family had debts. Service in a noble household seemed like the solution it usually seems to 14-year-olds and their desperate parents. And you stayed, you say. This is less neutral. She looks at you. Where would I go? Not a question. Not a challenge. Just a statement of geography. The geography of a woman who, over 22 years, has put down all her roots in one place, and for whom the question of going somewhere else is as abstract as the question of going to the moon. Back to your village, you say. She makes a small sound. My family's been dead for 10 years. My village? There's nobody there who knows me. I'm a stranger there. I'm not a stranger here. This is the most Carter has said to you in 2 months. You recognize it for what it is. Not a confidence, exactly, but an explanation. A more complete answer than, where would I go, covers. Doesn't it? You start. She knows what you're about to say. She cuts it off, not harshly. Don't. A moment of silence. The cold store is very cold and very dark. Your candles making 2 small pools of light that don't quite reach each other. I have made a life, she says. And her voice has the quality of something she's said to herself so many times, it's become smooth and worn like a stone in a stream. It's not the life I would have chosen, but it's mine. I know how to live it. I know the rules. And the rules include, you start again differently this time. Yes, she says before you finish. The rules include what you think they include. Quiet. I was young once, she says, and this, for some reason, hits you harder than anything else she said. The plainness of it. The past tense. I didn't like some of what I saw. I made a choice. Everyone here makes a choice eventually. You're making yours right now, whether you know it or not. She picks up her bundle, dried herbs, a wrapped block of hard cheese, and carries it out. You stand in the cold store for a moment with your candle. She's right. You know she's right in the technical sense. That every day you stay and say nothing is a choice. And the fact that it doesn't feel like a choice doesn't change the math of it. You also know that her choice and your choice don't have to be the same choice. That the fact that she has found a way to exist within this doesn't mean you must. You pick up your things and go back to the kitchen, and all the rest of that day, peeling, carrying, tending. Something in you is making a decision that won't fully declare itself for several more weeks. The bathing chamber becomes more familiar to you in January and February, which doesn't make it less strange. Familiarity and strangeness are not opposites in Čachtice. They layer over each other, the familiar on top and the strange underneath. and you learn to move through both at once. The routine of the bath itself you understand completely now. The carrying of water, the laying of cloths, the arrangement of the bottles and preparations. You know which bottle goes where. You know what temperature the water should be when it enters the tub. Hot enough to steam vigorously, knowing it will cool through the carrying and the pouring and the waiting. And you know how many pots are required for the volume the Countess prefers. The preparations in the small bottles you've learned some of. Lavender oil, which you recognise by smell. Rose water, similarly. An herbal preparation that Ilona Joe makes from a plant you don't recognise. Dried and boiled, strained, bottled. This goes in last and accounts for the herbal quality and the steam. These are normal things. These are ordinary components of a wealthy woman's bathing practice. There are other preparations you don't know the origin of. Ilona Joe adds them herself from a locked cabinet in the bathing room, and this private management of certain components is simply part of the ritual that you observe without commenting on, without asking about, without... You've learned to stop your mind from completing certain sentences. What you cannot stop noticing is the water. You see it in the carrying, and you see it in the removing, and these are two different stages of the same water, and the difference between the two stages is visible in the quality of the light from your candle, playing off the surface of the water in the containers as you carry it out. Water has a particular look when it carries what it carries. It has a particular colour, not dramatic, not the colour of anything decisive and impossible to explain away, but specific. A warmth to the colour that the original water, clear and cold from the well, does not have. A quality of density, slight but perceptible. You see this and you carry the water out and you do not say anything about what you see, because you are learning the first rule of survival in Čachtice, which is that naming a thing brings you closer to it, and the closer you are to the truth of this place, the more dangerous your position becomes. But you see it every time. There is a night in February when you do something you should not do. It happens because you can't sleep. The January insomnia has continued into February, a particular kind of wakefulness where your body's exhausted and your mind will not quiet, where you lie in the dark and listen to the castle's sounds with an attention that no longer lets you drift. It happens because Erzi is genuinely asleep this night, her breathing steady and slow, and the castle is quiet in its particular February quiet, the winds lighter than they were in the deep of winter. It happens because the something you've been building toward for weeks has finally reached a point where it requires action of some kind, even limited and dangerous action, because the alternative is simply continuing to lie in the dark and listen. You get up, you dress, not fully, just your outer skirt and a shawl, your stockings already on, your feet finding the cold floor and accepting it. You light your candle stub, shielding the light with your hand. You go out. The corridor outside your room is empty. The candle throws your shadow back against the wall, large and distorted. You move toward the stairs down toward the kitchen level, and then further down to the storage level. What you're doing is not rational in the sense that it will tell you anything you can use. You already know what you know. You've been knowing it for months. What you're doing is something more specific than information gathering. You're making your knowledge concrete. You're making yourself look at it directly, instead of through the oblique approach you've been using, the sideways glance, the ear turned and then turned away. You're going to stand at the edge of what you know and look at it. This is also what people do when they're building towards something. when they're accumulating courage or conviction or whatever it is that makes them able to do the thing they've been deciding to do. You go down the stairs, each step familiar. The third one creaks. You step to the right side of it where it doesn't. The second landing, the turn, the passage past the cold store, past the larder, past the barrel room, to the turn. Past the turn, the passage goes dark. No windows here, no source of natural light, just your candle making its small radius in the absolute dark. The door is there, heavy and iron-bound, old as the castle. You stop. The smell is present, the one you noticed twice before. It's stronger here, standing directly in front of the door instead of approaching around the turn, metallic, organic. You breathe through your mouth and the smell is less intense, but your body is registering things beyond smell, registering the particular quality of the space on the other side of the door through every sense it has available. Warm. The air immediately in front of the door is marginally warmer than the surrounding passage. The cold of the castle's lower level, which should be consistent, is interrupted here by a slight warmth that comes from the other side of the door, which means there is something generating heat on the other side. A fire, perhaps. A brazier. Some source of warmth in a space that would otherwise be as cold as the stone itself. Sound. You can hear something, not the sounds from your room. Those are muffled by distance and multiple layers of stone. Here, standing at the door, you can hear breathing, movement, something that is not the building, not the wind, not your own blood in your ears, though that is loud too. Something with the quality of another living person, or more than one, doing something that living people do. Your candle flame is moving, slightly, irregularly. Not from the castle's drafts. There's no draft in this passage tonight. The air is still. The flame is moving because your hand is shaking. You look at the door for what is probably 30 seconds and feels like half an hour. Then you turn and go back the way you came, up the stairs, down the corridor, through the door of your room. You undress to your stockings again. You lie down. Erzi's breathing hasn't changed. You lie in the dark with your eyes open and you think, now I know. Not anything new, technically. Everything you know now you knew before. But the difference between knowing something through inference and knowing something through the evidence of your own senses in a specific physical location is not nothing. It changes the weight of it. It makes the knowledge sit differently in your body, heavier, more specific, more demanding. In the morning you will get up and carry water. In 2 weeks you will find a way to obtain 3 sheets of paper. In a month the letter will be finished, and in another month after that a woman at the castle gate will walk out with something pressed into her hand. But tonight you lie in the dark and you know what you know, and the castle breathes around you, and somewhere below the kitchen level a door that is made of old iron-bound wood stands between you and the thing you've been carefully not looking at since November. You looked at it. You know what's there. And now the question of what to do about it, which has been theoretical, becomes entirely real. Let me tell you about the Báthory family, because you learn about them in pieces over the course of your year at Čachtice, and the pieces matter. You learn them from Kata mostly, in the small moments when Kata talks, which are rare and always cost her something. You learn them from overheard conversations among the senior servants, from the way the Countess's name is said in certain contexts, from the history that saturates this place the way the smell of cooking saturates the kitchen walls. The Báthorys are one of the most powerful families in Hungary, have been for centuries, The name goes back further than most people can trace their own lineage, back to the Mongol invasions, back to the founding of the kingdom itself in some versions. They have lands and title and connections to every significant house in Central Europe. They have also, and this is the part that gets spoken of very quietly if at all, a history that runs alongside all that power like a dark river alongside a road. A history of peculiarity, of excess, of certain things done by certain family members in certain times that, because of who the family is, were never properly accounted for. Her name before marriage was Báthory. Her husband was a Nadasdi. The Báthory name she kept because it was the greater name, the greater power, the older blood. She was educated unusually well for a woman of her time. Languages, Latin, German, Greek, music, politics. She managed vast estates while her husband was at war, which was essentially always the Nadasdi Black Knight, being a man whose primary occupation was fighting the Ottomans, and who did it with enough distinction to become legendary. She wrote letters of substance on matters of substance to people who mattered. She was, by every external accounting, extraordinary. This is not unusual in a certain kind of story. The extraordinariness preceding the horror, not separate from it, but in some way the same thing, the same qualities that made her capable of excellence, also making her capable of whatever the reverse of excellence is, the intensity, the absolute self-possession, the sense. This is what you feel when you see her, though you lack the vocabulary for it, of a person who has decided that her own will constitutes its own law. The Báthory family also has a history of, and here Keta uses a word that translates roughly as bad illness or blood sickness, a hereditary strain of something that expresses differently in different family members, but amounts to a departure from the ordinary rules that govern most people's relation to other people. Cruelty, excess, the assumption that other people's suffering is available for use. This is not an excuse, you understand, because it doesn't excuse anything, but it's a context of power and blood, and a family who have been doing approximately what they wanted with the people beneath them for so long that the distinction between what was permitted and what was not permitted had become genuinely unclear. You learn all of this in pieces. You fit the pieces together at night, in the dark, when the castle sounds are loudest. What she is not a mystery or a legend yet. It will become those things. In the winter of 1609, she is simply the Countess, the mistress of this castle, a widow managing a great estate, a woman whose behaviour has been, you will learn later, increasingly visible to people with the authority to act on what they see, but who has been, for years, protected by the very connections that should have made her accountable. Power operates like this. It insulates. It is why the things that should have triggered investigation sooner didn't. Why the girls who didn't come home are mourned in villages without official response. Why the letters written by various people over various years were received and filed and not acted upon. The arithmetic of her connections outweighing the arithmetic of the dead. Until the arithmetic shifted. Until enough had accumulated that even the connections couldn't hold it. You don't know any of this in February. What you know in February is the smell at the door and the warmth and the sound and the colour of the water in the bathing chamber, and the face of a girl with dark eyes who asked you about the water buckets and was gone by the seventh day. It is enough. The March night when you hear the specific sound, the one that resolves past the Erzi principle, that cannot be explained away, happens on a Wednesday. You know it's Wednesday because Thursday is when the village work group comes up. which means Wednesday is the day you've been tracking since February, when you started planning the letter. The sound wakes you at what you estimate is 3 in the morning. High, briefly, then not. You sit up. Your hands go to your knees the way hands do when they're looking for something to hold. Elsie is asleep. The room is cold, the brazier having burned through, and your breath makes its cloud and disperses and makes it again. After a while, the silence comes back. The specific castle silence that follows when the other sounds stop. Not quiet, not peaceful, but empty in the way that a space is empty after something has been removed from it. You've heard this sound before. The particular quality of it, the abrupt stopping, which is what makes it unambiguous, which is what makes the Elsie principle fail completely. You've heard this specific configuration twice before over the winter, and each time you've put your hands over your ears, and each time it has stopped, and each time the stopping has been as informative as the sound. You sit in the dark and you don't put your hands over your ears this time. This time you listen to the silence. The silence is complete. More complete than before. The wind is still. The structural sounds of the castle have stopped for the moment. The cold is absolute, and the dark is absolute, and you're sitting in both of them, holding completely still. And the silence tells you what you already know. There is something in this castle that cannot be allowed to continue, and you are the person who knows about it and is still alive and has hands that can hold a pen. The letter, as I said, takes 3 days to compose in your head and 2 nights to write on paper. What I didn't tell you is what it cost, specifically, to find the right words for what you know, which is the specific challenge of having information that is real and serious, and potentially the difference between many girls living and dying and needing to communicate it to someone powerful enough to act on it, in a language you control only partially, in a format, formal petition in effect, from a social position that gives you essentially no credibility with the people you need to convince. The letter cannot be hysterical. An hysterical letter from a kitchen servant would be discarded without reading. It cannot be vague. Vagueness is easy to dismiss. It needs to be specific enough to be credible and measured enough to be taken seriously. And you're 17 years old and have been educated just enough to write, not enough to write this. You do it anyway. The first night, you write the dates. You write the names, Bala, November, her age, her village, the stated reason for her reassignment. You write the name of the dark-haired girl from December. You write the approximate dates of other disappearances as accurately as you can reconstruct them, noting that your knowledge is from observation rather than direct information. You write the word missing next to each one. You don't write what you think happened. You let the dates and the names make the argument. The second night, you write the physical evidence, not dramatically. You write it the way Georgi moves through the kitchen in the morning, precisely without emotion, with professional attention to specificity. The colour of the water in the bathing chamber, and on what dates you observed it, and the degree to which it differed from water used for ordinary bathing. The smell at the lower passage door, the warmth, the sounds, the dates of those sounds as best you can remember. You write the names Ilona, Jo and Dorothea, who are present in the bathing chamber. You write the name Anna Davulia. You note that these women are in the Countess's confidence and may have information of greater specificity than you have. At the bottom of the last page, you write your own name and the name of your village and the fact that you're a kitchen servant in the 3rd tier of the household, which is relevant because it explains why your information is observational rather than direct. Then you sit in the dark with the 3 pages on your knee, and you think about whether you've condemned yourself. Possibly. The letter could be intercepted, could be read by someone in the castle's administration, could be traced back to you through the paper, though you've been careful about that, using the courier's leftover paper and not the kitchen's, and the courier's paper is not castle-specific, could be read and dismissed and result in nothing, in which case your existence here has a sharply decreased expected length. Could also be read by the right person and do the thing you need it to do. You fold the paper, small as possible, smaller than a playing card. You put it inside your sleeve in the gap between the lining and the outer fabric that has been there since the dress was made. A gap you discovered accidentally while washing it, and that has served as the most practical pocket available to a woman whose clothing has no pockets. Then you go to sleep, not immediately, but eventually. The Thursday arrives. The village work group. The woman's face in the crowd. She's there. You see her as soon as the gate opens. You cross the courtyard with your crock of rendered fat. You take the path that intersects. The letter leaves your sleeve and finds the ground beside her feet, in a motion so small and natural that you don't even feel it leave. Your hands have been doing practical things for months. Your hands are competent at small, precise tasks. You keep walking. You will not know, ever, whether the letter was found, read, passed on, burned, lost. The Palatin's subsequent investigation is based on testimony that includes accounts from people more credible than you, from local clergy, from the families of gentry girls, from a doctor who had treated survivors. Whether your 3 pages contributed anything to what eventually happens, you'll never know. But you sent them. You put words to what you knew and handed them outside the walls. This is what was available to you. This is what you had. The spring that follows is different from the winter and from the autumn. You exist in it with a quality of attention that's different from before. Not more afraid exactly, but more present, more aware of the specific texture of each day, which is something that happens, you think, when you've decided to do something and done it and are now waiting to see what comes of it. The future becomes very immediate. The present takes on weight. You notice things you didn't have time for before, the quality of the light on the hillside as spring advances, the green coming back in stages from the valley floor up the slope, working its way toward the castle walls. The birdsong which starts before dawn, and which you're awake for now, lying in your room in the grey light before the day begins, listening to the birds the way you used to listen to the castle sounds. The birds are uncomplicated. They do what birds do, mark territory, find mates, negotiate the ordinary business of survival in spring, and their sounds don't require the interpretation that the castle sounds require. They are what they are. You find this restful. You make time to know Elsie better. This is a deliberate choice. You've been careful with Elsie, careful not to involve her, careful to keep her outside the radius of your quiet decisions. But she's been beside you for 5 months, and she's been kind in her limited way, and she is, in the geography of this place, your closest thing to a friend. You talk about her village, you talk about her family, parents, 2 brothers, a sister who married well and whose name Elsie says with a combination of pride and something she doesn't name that might be envy. You talk about what you both hope for after this. Elsie wants to save enough to make herself a good match, not a great one, but a real one, to a man who has a trade and isn't cruel and doesn't drink away his earnings. She has it worked out in specifics, how much she needs, how long that will take, what village she might go back to, or not. "Do you have someone?" she asks. "No, not yet." "You're young, plenty of time." This is the kind of thing people say, and Elsie says it genuinely, without the cynicism that the phrase sometimes carries. She means it. She is, you realise, a genuinely optimistic person, which in these circumstances requires an act of will so sustained and so complete that it's become invisible. Just the texture of her personality. You admire this more than you can say. "Elsie," you say one afternoon, peeling something side by side. "If you ever needed to get a message outside the castle..." She stops peeling. "Don't," she says, just like Cater. "Don't." But then she starts peeling again, and her voice, when it comes, is very quiet. "The priest in the village," she says, looking at her parsnip. "He hears everything eventually, the way priests do." A pause. "He also has connections to the bishop's office in Esztergom." She doesn't say anything else. You don't say anything else. But you look at Elsie, and you see something you didn't see before, which is that her careful cheer and her deliberate optimism and her efficient not looking are not the same as Cater's. That somewhere inside Elsie's system of survival, there is still a person who knows the difference between what she can live with and what she can't, and who has drawn that line somewhere, and who, when pressed, will acknowledge that the line exists. This makes you love her in the way that you can love someone you've known for only months, in the provisional and specific way of people who've been in the same difficult place together. Summer at Čachtice is beautiful. This is a fact you weren't prepared for, and it catches you off guard the first time it's genuinely warm, and the light comes over the ridge at an angle that makes everything on the hillside glow. The valley below is spectacular in summer. Green and gold, the river visible in the distance on clear days, the villages tiny and peaceful looking at this distance, life going on down there at a scale you can appreciate without needing to be part of it. You eat your noon meal in the courtyard some days when the weather is good enough. A piece of bread, bit of cheese, sometimes an apple from the previous autumn's store, slightly softened now but still sweet. You sit against the sunny side of the courtyard wall and eat and watch the castle go about its business and let the warmth sink into your shoulders, which are always slightly tense from the cold work. This is a specific joy, small, bodily, available. The sun on your face after a winter like that winter. You learn in June, through Elsie who hears things, that Davulia is significantly unwell, her vision failing, her mobility reduced. She is present in the castle, but no longer present in the way she was, no longer moving through spaces with the quiet authority of someone in the Countess's innermost circle. She is attended rather than attending. The Countess's response to this is, through the medium of the household, visible. She's in the bathing chamber more often. She stays longer. The preparations Ilona Joe adds from the locked cabinet are, in your careful observation, in greater quantity. You do not want to know what you know about this connection. You know it anyway. Summer also brings an influx of girls. More than the winter, more than the spring, an increase in the number being brought to the castle for the stated educational purpose, and you count them with the accuracy of someone who's been counting all year, and the gap between arrivals and visible departures continues to be what it has been. The arithmetic is not complicated. You don't need to be a merchant with a counting ledger. You just need to be a person with eyes and a memory and the willingness to use them. The influx coincides with Davulia's deterioration. You put this together the way you put other things together. Slowly, without wanting to, the pieces assembling themselves whether you participate actively or not. You have written your letter. You are waiting. This is what you have. The summer is long and warm and beautiful and terrible. Autumn comes with the particular crispness of Hungarian autumn, which is different from spring's warmth in that it has an edge to it, a warning in the air, the beautiful light at a lower angle now that makes long shadows even at midday. The leaves on the hillside trees turn, not all at once, but in a slow sequence that moves from the highest ground down, the yellows and reds working their way toward the valley over the course of October. You have been here a year. This thought arrives one morning in November. Exactly a year since the cart brought you and Borbala up through the fog, and it sits in you strangely. A year. Everything you knew before arriving has been compressed into the category of before, and the year itself has expanded to fill most of your accessible memory, so vivid and specific and physically demanding that the years before it seem, by comparison, oddly light. You're not the same person who got off that cart, not in the ways you hoped when you left your village, not experienced in the exciting ways you imagined when service at a great castle seemed like an opportunity, but different in ways that are real and won't be undone. The competence of your hands, the control of your face, the knowledge of what you know, the specific courage or foolishness, or both, they're never easy to tell apart, of having done something with it. Darvulia dies in December. You hear this the way you hear all significant castle news, through Ersi, who hears it from above, who tells you in the kitchen with her eyes on her work and her voice very level. Dead. The old companion. The castle changes around this event, subtle but perceptible. The way pressure changes when something that's been holding it in place is removed. Ilona Jo seems, if possible, more alert, more watchful. The senior servants move through the spaces with an extra quality of care, the way people do when they sense that something near them is becoming unstable. The Countess, in this period, you see less of, and when you do see her, she has something in her face you haven't seen before, or that you've seen only in glimpses. Not grief, or not only grief, but something underneath the grief, something hungry, something that has been disciplined into behaviour and is, with the constraint of Darvulia's presence gone, asserting itself more directly. This is when the sound from below the castle changes, not in type, still what it has been, but in frequency. And 9 days after Darvulia dies, the dark-haired girl you remember from December last year, the one with honest eyes, the one who made a small face at the ale, she's been replaced by a dozen other girls whose names you don't know, and some of whom have already not come home. And the thing that has been happening in this castle for however long it's been happening is happening with less restraint than before, and you know this, and your letter is either somewhere or nowhere, and you have done what you could do. The horses come 9 days after Darvulia dies. Thurso, the Palatine, his men, the official weight of the Hungarian state, grinding slow and late but arriving. You stand in the kitchen doorway and watch the courtyard fill with men who have authority, and the relief that moves through you is so large it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like a structural change, like a wall that has been holding something back for a year finally giving way, and what floods through is not a comfortable feeling, but it is an honest one. It is over. The thing that has been happening here is over. Not over in the sense of resolved, accounted for, compensated. It will never be those things. The girls who didn't come home won't come home because she's arrested. The dark-haired girl and Borbala and all the others whose name she kept in her own ledger. Their lives were what they were and ended where they ended, and no arrest changes that. But the thing that has been happening stops happening. This specific future harm stops. And this is real. And it matters. And you stand in the kitchen doorway and watch the men in the courtyard and let yourself feel the particular quietness of a risk that has been ongoing for a year, becoming a risk that has ended. Georgi beside you says nothing. He looks at the courtyard. He puts his hand briefly on your shoulder, just briefly, the gesture of a large, quiet man communicating something he doesn't have words for or doesn't choose to use, and then he goes back into the kitchen. You stay in the doorway for another moment. Then you go back to work. The weeks after the arrest are strange. The castle doesn't empty immediately. It can't. There is an estate to manage, a household to maintain, legal proceedings to initiate, property to account for. The Nadasti heirs send representatives. New administrators arrive. The shape of the place changes, new faces replacing old, the old faces either being taken away by the legal process or simply choosing to go. Ilona Jo is arrested with her employer, Dorothea too. Others. There will be a trial, though not immediately. These things take time, the machinery of justice being what it is, slow and grinding and complicated by the necessity of accounting for a woman whose family connections extend to the highest levels of the kingdom. You learn later that Thurzo's handling of the case is itself complicated, that he takes care to manage it in a way that limits the political damage to himself, to the Báthory name that is also connected to powerful Protestant interests, to the stability of a region already made delicate by the Ottoman Wars, that the Countess is confined rather than tried, protected in her confinement by the same influence that should have stopped her sooner. You learn this, and you think about it the way you think about the letter, whether it mattered, whether anything you did mattered in any accountable way. What you come to eventually is this. The accounting of impact is not available to most people who do the things they need to do. Kata knows this, in her way. The reason she makes the choice she makes is partly that she correctly perceives that her individual action has no guaranteed impact, and the cost of trying is real and immediate. You made a different choice, and the impact is genuinely unclear. The investigation was already underway. Your letter was one voice in a growing volume of voices that finally reached the critical mass required to move a powerful man. Maybe you were part of that mass. Maybe you weren't. You'll never know. What you know is that you did not stay silent, that you wrote down what was true, that you handed it to someone outside the walls. This is what was available to you. This is enough. The walk home takes 4 days. You stop the first night at an inn in the village directly below the castle. Your first night outside the castle walls in almost 17 months. The inn is small and rough, and the bed has actual fleas, which you know because you're bitten 3 times before you fall asleep and twice more after. And this is so ordinary and human and manageable a problem that it makes you laugh into the pillow. Fleas. Just fleas. A problem with a scale and a solution. A problem that doesn't require you to navigate anything except your own irritation. You sleep with the fleas, and in the morning you're on the road and the day is clear and cold in the April way, where the cold still has intention behind it, but the sun is already winning. The second day it rains. A light spring rain, not unpleasant, the kind that smells of everything coming back to life, soil and new grass and the faint sweetness of growth. You pull your shawl over your head and walk. Your boots are adequate. Not good, but adequate. The mud is not as bad as it was in November on the road up. The road down is better. You think about Elsie, who is staying. She made this clear 2 days before you left. She's not ready. She needs more time, more money, the right moment. You told her you understood. You did understand. You do. Her calculation is her own, and she's been making it for 3 years, and she knows what she needs. You hugged her at the kitchen door. She stiffened slightly. She's not a person who hugs easily, and then patted you once on the shoulder blade in the way of someone who is doing their best with an uncomfortable situation. Write when you get there, she said. If you have paper, I'll find paper. See that you do. You think about Georgi, who gave you 3 extra pieces of bread for the road, wrapped in cloth, without comment, as if this was simply part of the normal kitchen distribution, and not a small act of kindness from a man who communicates almost exclusively through food. You think about Keita, who said nothing when you left, but who was standing in the cold store doorway as you walked out of the kitchen for the last time, and who watched you go with an expression that was, in its particular closed way, something. You think about the castle on the hill which is behind you now, which you have turned your back on. The 3rd day the road passes through a market town. You stop to resupply. Bread, hard cheese, a cup of hot something from a stall that you don't identify but that is warm and good. The town is ordinary. People buying and selling, children underfoot, dogs investigating the gutters, a blacksmith, a woman arguing with a cart driver about a broken wheel. You stand in the market square with your cup of hot something, and you look at all of this ordinary human activity and you feel it working on you like sun works on cold. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. The accumulated ordinariness of people doing ordinary things, melting the specific kind of cold that the castle put into you. It will take time. You know this. You'll wake in the night sometimes for months, maybe for years, with your heart going fast and the specific memory of a particular sound pulling you out of sleep. You'll find yourself calculating the faces of girls who are and aren't where they should be. You'll have a particular relationship with heavy iron-bound doors for the foreseeable future. These are the things you carry. You can carry them. You've been carrying them for months already. The 4th day, you recognize the road. This stretch of it, this particular curve, this stand of trees on the left that were bare in November and are leafed out now. This ridge line that you know means you're close. Your feet move faster without you deciding they should. The village appears first as smoke. The smoke of morning fires from 30 chimneys rising in the still air. Then as sound, a dog barking, the particular quality of a dog barking in a familiar place. Then as smell, wood smoke, ploughed earth, the communal smell of a place where people live in proximity and know each other. Then your mother's house. The door is closed. You stand in front of it for a moment. Your hand is on the latch. Your bundle is on your back. Your feet, after 4 days of road, are tired in the good tired way, the travelling towards somewhere tired. You open the door. The smell inside is your childhood, straw and smoke and the particular smell of your family's life, which you've never been able to name and which hits you now like something physical, a thing that moves through your chest and takes up residence there. Your mother is at the fire. She turns. 1 year and 5 months. She's older than you expected and exactly the same as you expected. Her hands, when they hold your face, are warm. You close your eyes, and now let the rest of it go. The sounds under the castle, the colour of the water, the faces you counted, the door in the lower passage, the letter you wrote in the dark on 2 nights in February. Let all of it be true, because it is, and let all of it be over, because that too is true, and let the two things exist together in you the way they will for years. The weight of what you know, alongside the warmth of this room, your mother's hands, the ordinary miracle of being home. You've been in a castle on a hill for 17 months, in the company of something that had no name yet, but that history would name eventually. That history would argue over and mythologize and never fully account for, because the full accounting of that kind of thing is not available within the limits of what history can hold. What you hold is smaller, more specific. 3 sheets of paper, a door in the dark, a girl with honest eyes who asked about water buckets. Borbala, who came with you on the cart, who made conversation for the first hour, who stopped. These are yours. You carry them, and you are home. And the fire is warm, and your sister is taller, and your brother is learning to read, and the bread your mother puts in your hands is rough and dark and slightly bitter, and the most real thing you've tasted in 17 months. Eat it slowly. Feel the warmth of the room, hear the fire, hear your mother's voice asking the questions she's been holding for a year and 5 months. Answer them. Tell her the parts you can tell. The cold, the work, the food, the wages, the good parts, the true parts that don't require you to bring the castle into this room. The castle stays where it is, on its hill. Doing what stone does, which is to stand and stand and stand, indifferent to what happened inside it, waiting for the centuries to take it apart slowly and leave it open to the sky. You are not on that hill. You are here. And the fire is warm, and your mother is warm, and the room is full of the smell of your family's ordinary life. And outside the window the spring evening is doing what spring evenings do, which is to be beautiful and simple and available to anyone who stops and looks. Stop. Look. You're done carrying the castle. Let your eyes close the way they want to. Let your body, which has been cold for 17 months, accept the warmth. Let sleep come the way it comes when you're finally safe, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the slow, gentle way of a body that has been running on necessity for a long time and is now, finally, allowed to stop. The fire crackles. The sound of your family in the other room, your sister's voice, your brother's. Ordinary sounds, the most extraordinary ordinary sounds. Tomorrow there will be work. There is always work, but different work. The work of fields and seasons and the simple renewable demands of ordinary life, not the work of navigating a castle's silences or calibrating your expression or carrying water that you have to not see when you remove it. Tomorrow there is just tomorrow. Tonight there is just this room and this fire and the fact of being here, which is the only fact that matters right now. Centuries will pass. The castle on the hill will become a ruin that people photograph in summer and debate in academic journals and tell stories about on cold nights when the right kind of dark requires the right kind of story. The Countess will become something between history and legend. The Blood Countess, they'll call her, the name accumulating details that are true and details that are not. The real horror of what she did, both less dramatic and more real than the legend requires it to be. The girls will have no legends. They'll have names in court documents, some of them. Names recorded by clerks whose handwriting is difficult now, in different shaped letters from a different shaped world. Others won't have names in any document anywhere. There'll be numbers in an argument about numbers. But they were real as your hands on this bread, as real as the fire, as real as the morning they each woke up and did whatever they did before everything changed for them. This is what you know. This is what you carry. And you are home, and it's enough, and it's time to rest. Let sleep take you, the way it took Zsuzsa, 17 years old, in a village in Hungary on a spring evening in 1610, after 17 months in a castle on a hill. Let the warmth be enough. Let the fire be enough. Let the ordinary miracle of being home and safe and fed and not afraid be enough. Because it is more than enough. Because some nights in the last 17 months you weren't certain you'd have it. You have it. Rest now. The castle is behind you. The road home is behind you. All of it is behind you. Just this room. Just this warmth. Just the slow, heavy, earned descent into sleep. Your breathing slowing. Your shoulders dropping. The fire's warmth on your face. And the long quiet of rest. Finally rest. Spreading out like a warm field in late afternoon, golden and still and yours. Sleep. Good night.